I'm kind of doing them. I'm just kind of doing them in the order they are. They're 4s and 3s and so on. It looks like Kurt Serber is next. Hang on. Let's see if this is another one of these. Oh, not too bad. After having worked as a paramedic for a few years, I'm finally going back to school to push for a higher degree. Congratulations. Oklahoma requires college students to take U.S. history and U.S. federal government classes. In class today, we discussed briefly liberty versus freedom. My professor, I think it's a typo, said they're going to dig deeper into the topic later in the semester, but he noted that the textbook uses the term interchangeably, which he feels is a mistake. I'd like to get your take on it. What is liberty? What is freedom? And how are the two different? That's a hell of a question. Well, I don't know. Let me think about it. Liberty is freedom with good manners, right? I mean, that's what liberty is. Liberty is freedom with good manners. Freedom is the ability to do whatever you want to, and freedom in the higher sense, you know, is something that we all fight for and something that so many people take for granted. But liberty carries with it associations of nobility that the word freedom doesn't. Liberty is the word that's sprinkled throughout the Constitution. Liberty is the word that is the basis of why this country formed a revolution against British power. So I would say that freedom is the ability to do what you want, and liberty is the ability to do the right things that you want. I don't know if there's a semantic difference between the two that I'm unaware of, and I'm sure there is, but that's how I would define it. It's something I think, personally, think it's a little more noble. And even, I was trying to think of an example of liberty in a negative way. The closest thing I could come to was, a bunch of drunken sailors that are out on liberty. But even then, that's not why they're there. It's not the mission they're on. Sometimes people drink too much. And so, yeah, I would just say it's a higher thing. Freedom is the freedom to drive your car, or the freedom to own a fishing boat, or the freedom to say what you want to say, or all of these things are freedoms. This is actually a little better. Liberty is collected freedom. That's what it is. Liberty is a collection of freedoms. I have the right to free speech. I have the right to not incriminate myself. I have all of these freedoms, and we're fighting very hard to maintain them. And all of them taken together means that I have liberty. That's a much better answer. Liberty is a collection of your freedoms. So I don't talk about having, many liberties. I don't say I have the liberty to free speech and the liberty to do this. I have liberty. I'm able to do these things. I'm protected from interference. So, yeah, that's what I would say. All of these individual freedoms that are protected by the Constitution, and by the way, which predated the Constitution, and actually it's not so much that they're that they're giving us the rights, because they're not. They're basically saying the government can't take away these existing rights. It's a huge difference. So yeah, I think that's probably it. Liberty would be the basket full of freedoms that you can look at individually. I can count freedoms, but liberty is a state of having those freedoms. It's an interesting question. I love questions I don't know the answer to. All right, let's go. Steve Darrow says, I was thinking more about you and Dave Rubin creating a platform, and it occurs to me that a huge hurdle will be the way the two sides view the efficacy of government. Liberals see a goal and believe that achieving the goal requires government involvement, where conservatives see that the government operates by a set of incentives that often work against achieving the intended goal. Is setting this basic difference a prerequisite to building the platform? And is the ignorance of the role incentives play in achieving goals the fundamental problem with well-intended liberals? That's a very, very, very good question, a very astute question. Steve, you know, you get what you pay for, and you pay for what you get. And if you subsidize something, you get more of it. The government, you know, with good intention, was facing a situation where there were single mothers, and a social situation where they simply could not be a divorced person, and they were hurting, and so they basically made assistance available to these people, and that seemed well and good as a way to get citizens back on their feet, and have children not raised in poverty and you know, some filth. But what it turned into was a subsidy for out-of-wedlock children. That's what it turned into. It started, as so many of these ideas do, as a good idea, but they're not good ideas because people don't think them through. If you start paying people benefits based on the number of children they have, the more children you have, the more money you get. You are subsidizing what you're trying to prevent. And we do this all the time. We do this all the time. We subsidize the things that we're trying to prevent. And I am absolutely appalled and frustrated by this. The one example I use way too often, but it's a good one, is look, I love the Defense Department. I love our military, and I love all the cool jets and gadgets and submarines and all that stuff. It's my whole life. I love it. But the way we buy these gigantic weapon systems is through cost plus, which means that we get the government, which means the taxpayer, which means me. I get billed for a nuclear submarine, and I don't say, I want a nuclear submarine, how much is it? And they say 200 million, and I say, okay, I'll take 10. The way it happens is I say, I'd like 10 submarines. What will that cost? And they say, we don't know. Really? Yep. Well, but we would like you to commit to the 10 submarines. Okay, so I commit to the 10 submarines. And now, the more they cost, the longer it takes, the richer they get. And that is incentivizing everything that you're not supposed to incentivize. You're supposed to incentivize efficiency, frugality, competence, and capability. That's what I want in my weapon systems. I want them to be capable. I want them to be lethal. I want them to work. I want them to work all the time. I want them to protect our people, and I want them to do it at the lowest price they can while accomplishing these objectives. And I understand that's an expensive hobby, that nuclear attack submarines, among other things, are not cheap. And I'm ready to pay for those things. What I'm not ready to do is to watch them or F-35s or anything else go 15 years over schedule and double, triple the original estimates. And the reason that happens is because that's what we incentivize. We incentivize delays and cost overruns because it's more money. They get a percentage of whatever it costs. Cost plus a percentage. So the higher the cost, the bigger their percentages. It's just plain insanity. And we do it all the time. And we do it because the money doesn't belong to anybody. You know, it doesn't belong to anybody. It's a big pot of money that Lockheed and Boeing and the rest of those guys out there see as a giant pot. It's a bottomless pot of money. It's a big bottomless pot of money. And so they have to figure out what's the biggest ladle that they can get into there, and how much can they scoop out at any one time. But the people who you would think would be on the other side of this bargaining table trying to get the best product for the lowest cost, they're not interested in that at all because it's not their money either. It's just a big endless pot to them too. That's the problem. We really need citizen advocates. Well, here I go. Right? I was going to say we need citizen advocates, representative of the citizens of this country, to watch all of these deals and look at all of this waste and try to bring some kind of accountability to all of this out-of-control spending on the part of Congress. And then suddenly it just hits me that, yes, that we should have a group of citizens who keep an eye on these things. And we could call them a Congress. And we could have 435 people elected by the people of the country based on their demographics and their districts, and we'll throw in a couple of guys, kind of like super reps, two for each state, and they'll watch over this horrible spending and catastrophic borrowing. So that's what we do. I mean, we can't You can't put citizens in a position to monitor government spending when it's the elected citizens who's doing the spending. Sometimes I wonder, I mean, I really do. I wonder if we are not in a place where we are now so productive as a country that we actually genuinely can print money. That the whole idea of you have to take in more than you spend over time, I actually start to wonder if that's not an antiquated idea. I start to wonder if this isn't in fact one kind of a giant society where everybody's doing what everybody wants, and as long as we're exchanging things that have measure, as long as we know what $100 is, then it doesn't really matter who it belongs to. Now, I understand that most of the financial institutions are predicated on getting a return on that investment and so on. But I don't know how else you spend $20,000 billion more than you took in. That's not what you spent. You spent much more than that. That's what you owe. I don't know. In any event, it's pretty sad. So let me just get back to the basics of this question real good. It's the incentive. It's easy to see why somebody... I'm going to simplify things here and generalize a bit. Conservatives think that honest people go into business and crooks go into government, and liberals think that crooks go into business and honest people go into government. So in a nutshell, that's basically it. And it's easy for them to see, and there's certainly plenty of examples, of people in business being unspeakably greedy and vile and corrupt and all the rest. Enron and Wolf of Wall Street, and Bernie Madoff and all the rest of it. You can see business people taking advantage of the situation for unethical gains. But you don't ever really see that in government, because government is faceless. It's faceless. It's not like McDonald's is taking a piece of my paycheck every month. If I'm going to go to McDonald's, I have to hand them cash, post-tax cash. McDonald's is not taking my money before I see it. There's not a McDonald's deduction on my paycheck. And so we don't see where that money goes and how it's spent. It's spent by bureaucrats, and it's spent through red tape, and it's not coming out of the White House or the floor of the House of Representatives. Our money disappears in small offices staffed by junior administrative assistants to the undersecretary of so on, and that's it. So what are some of the incentives that we have set up, and why are these things destroying us? Well, one of the incentives that we've set up is we've set up an incentive for a government agency to be immortal. And the reason we do that is because a government agency hires people, and those people don't want to lose their job. So government agencies, once created, are immortal. They never die. EPA is a great example of this. When I was a kid and the EPA was coming into being, there was trash on the side of every highway. People would just drive down the street, just throw bags of trash out the window. And the skies were bad, and all the cars in a traffic jam, little blue puffs of smoke coming out of the tailpipes of every single one of them. And your eyes burned, and jets left black streaks in the air, and smokestacks were just putting out all this smoke everywhere. And the Great Lakes were sterile. They were completely dead. There's so much mercury and poison in the lakes and rivers of this country that there was no fish in them. And the Cayuga River caught fire. The river burned in Cleveland, I think it was. And so along comes the EPA, and they clean it up. And there's a lot of protests from the part of businessmen and other people who are getting their toes stepped on, but they did it. They cleaned it up. The air in Los Angeles now is infinitely better than it was when I got here in 1988. I have not seen one of those cotton days where I can't see 5 blocks. I haven't seen one in 10 years. And I think that's a good thing, especially when I look at Chinese workers and so on. So I think, great. So here's the problem. Are the airs cleaner? Yes. Are the waterways cleaner? Yes. The Great Lakes are filled with fish now, and so are Americans' rivers, and so on and so forth. They've done their job. Does that mean they go away? No, it does not. And this is where the problem lies. They have to find some way to justify their existence. And in order to justify their existence, they have to invent problems for them to solve. And if they solve those problems, then they're out of work. So why would they do that? I mean, if you look at the incentive of it, why would you do it? If you're working for the Environmental Protection Agency, the last thing you want is a clean environment. Because if there's a clean environment, you're out of a job. And if the environment keeps getting cleaner, and it has been, then we have to find new things that we can be there to protect you from, like carbon dioxide, let's say. And that's how it works. And they're immortal. And there's another factor to this immortality. It's just another little cog in the giant machine of waste and corruption and venality and theft and all the rest. And that's the idea of budgeting. Let's say I need $100 million for 1 year of my project, and I get a lot done with $100 million of federal money for my federal project. And it comes time to ask for money again next year. Now, if I've done a lot of work with $100 million and I only need $50 million the second year, that's what a sensible, honest, decent person would do. Our budget request this year is $50 million. Really, it was $100 million last year. Yeah, well, we got a lot done with $100 million. This year, it's $50 million. If you do that, that's the end. It's insane. They simply don't understand it. These bureaucrats do not comprehend that statement, because they'll say, well, why would you take less money than you can get? You have to increase your budget. It's to the point now where Republicans and conservatives are accused of cutting programs when they're not cutting funding to this program. They're not reducing the amount of funds to the program. They're reducing the rate at which additional funds are added to the program, but that's not cutting funds from the program. It's not, here's $100 million for school lunches, and they want it to be $120 million next year, the Democrats, but the Republicans want it to be $110 million. Therefore, the Republicans are cutting school lunch programs. See how it works? Even though the school lunch programs are getting more money than they did the previous year. And this kind of, shenanigans goes on, all the time. And, you just don't do it. I've heard cases of stories. I've heard from people, first-person stories from individuals in aerospace and so on. A story where a project, government project was, some kind of study or something was requested. And they typed this memo up, deal memo and an estimate of what this would cost, sent it into the Department of Defense, but they made a mistake, an honest mistake. They'd added an extra zero, and it went from $800,000 to $8 million, something along those lines, right? And the Department of Defense, or whoever it was, comes back and says, that's a lot more than we thought it would be. How soon do you want the $8 million? And these guys look at each other and just, what do you say? I see $20 on the street, I pick it up and I try to find who it belongs to. If I saw $7 million on the street, I would do the same thing, but I'm not like these people, and neither are you. So that's how it works. I remember quotes during the Civil War when the Union armies were trying to stock up on supplies. They needed lots and lots of horses. They needed hundreds of thousands of shoes, and they needed clothing, uniforms, all of this. And parenthetically, because I love these little things, these little asides, that's where the word shoddy comes from. Shoddy construction, as you know, means something that's just badly built. It's kind of shoddy looking. It's not very good. Turns out that shoddy is an actual material. There's actually something called shoddy. And basically what it was it was a form of fabric that was pressed rather than woven. So what they would do is, instead of taking cotton threads, which cost money, and weaving it into cloth, which cost money, these speculators would basically take lint and all of the castaway pieces, just lint and short ends and threads and scraps and all this stuff. They'd grind it up into a paste, and they'd put it in this gelatin, and they'd let it set, and it looked a bit like a jacket, and they sold these things or shoes, and they sold these things in huge numbers to the Union Army, to the United States government. And no fooling now, the first time it rained, the clothes literally dissolved off of their backs, and the clothes genuinely just dissolved because they were pretty shoddy. And I remember in the Civil War trilogy by Shelby Foote that there were direct quotes from some of these guys saying, "You will get as much money as you have the nerve to ask for." I mean, they've just come out of having somebody bought some insane amount of things, and they're coming out of Congress and they're elated. And there's some new guys going in to pitch something else, shoes or horses or whatever, and they say to him, "You will get whatever price you have the nerve to ask for." And so that's why we're $20,000 billion. Let's see. So government has its own problems too, and the incentives for the government are not good. I think anybody can understand this. And in order to have that discussion, to answer your final part of your question, Steve, if you're going to build a platform of hands across the water kind of thing, you have to admit your own defects in it. There are many ethical defects in unregulated capitalism, which is why the fair players like regulations. They don't like regulations that smother their incentive, but let me just say rules, game rules, right? They have to they understand the rules of the game and they play by the rules. The government's job should be to enforce the rules, not to keep adding rules or making up rules or tackling players or any of the rest of it. Okay,